Hello humans! Today I want to talk to you guys a little bit about Erik Frost knives. So, first off we have to start off with the guy. In 1891, Frost Erik Erikson? I don't speak Swedish. Returned to Ostnor, this place, in the region of Mora after 4 years in the USA working as a lumberjack. He started off by beginning a company that sold timber, sledges, and wedges, and he made small, useful shop knives out of leftover pieces. So pieces of scrap steel from making the wedges and the sledges, and also using scrap wood left over from making the sledges. And these knives became insanely popular. The region of Mora, by this point in time, was already quite famous for making knives. They have been making knives for almost 500 years now in that region of Sweden, and it was a very successful business. So because people really liked the Frost Erik knives, more so than the rest of the equipment, he actually made a permanent switch over to primarily making knives, and by 1904 he had 10 employees and was making more than 19,000 knives annually. And that's what he was doing. He was working exclusively on knives. He made knives for a couple of different militaries during both world wars. He did quite successfully for himself for a very long time. At some point in time, the company changed from Frost Erik Erikson Knife Factory to Erik Frost Knives. And eventually it made one more switch to being known as Frost Cutlery. I don't know how well you can see that, but hopefully you can. Anyways, this was going along well for a very long time until the 1980s. In 1988, 1/3 of the Frost knife company was sold to somebody else who was going to be quite important to this story, or another company that's quite important to this story, K.J. Erikson's Knife Factory. So, K.J. Erikson was an employee at Frost Knives around the turn of the century. He was fired at some point before 1910, and he started his own knife company with an acquaintance in 1912. By 1916, his acquaintance had decided that he was no longer interested in pursuing knife making professionally, and the name of the company was changed to K.J. Erikson's Knife Factory. Over time, this was continued until in 2005, the remainder of Frost Cutlery was bought up in a sort of merger with K.J. Erikson's Knife Factory and became a company known as Mora of Sweden. So Mora of Sweden owned many patents, including for stuff like bores for ice fishing, saws, bunch of different stuff. But their main business remained knives. And they made some really great knives. You might actually know of the Mora knives because in 2016, the name was changed from Mora of Sweden to morakniv, as you can see right here. And it just continued running. Morakniv has been around for a very long time. The Mora knife has been around, like I said, for close to 500 years at this point, but there is a few things that the Frost Erik Erikson company did that was pretty unique. So, to start off with, they exported their knives internationally. Yeah, that's one of the biggest changes that they made. They stopped selling exclusively in Sweden or even exclusively in the Scandinavian countries. They sold internationally, baby. And as a result of that, they popularized this Scandi grind, this Scandinavian style grind with a single bevel that comes to a point that only comes up usually like 1/3 of the blade at most. And it's a style that's still very, very much liked by bushcrafters and people who do traditional woodworking with knives because it works so very well. So they did that, made huge differences. The other thing that they did during the 20s and 30s when they started massively exporting knives around the world is they made significant deals with a Swedish steel manufacturer by the name of Stanvik. Stanvik remains extremely popular today, including on some quite nice knives that use stuff like the Stanvik 14C28N Stanvik. In the I believe the early 1930s, Stanvik purchased machines that allowed them to make custom grades of stainless steels, which the Frost Ericsson company, Ericsson, not Ericsson, Ericsson company, made extensive use of both in marketing and also just in terms of making extremely good knives. Having that sort of quality control on the blade steel meant that you could have a much better product. And a few models of the Frost cutlery knives did actually end up getting integrated into morakniv's line. I believe that this knife became the basis for the Scout 42, I believe, although I will have to double check that. And knives like this actually became the origin of their entire fishing lines. So, like I said, during the 80s, there was a very, very bad decline in their business. They ended up selling off the whole company or merging the whole company in 2005. But there still is a very long history to be told on these knives. Mora knives remain extremely, extremely popular, and they will for a very, very long time. But not only that, a lot of people in Sweden's first knives either came from the KJ Ericsson's knife factory or Frost Cutlery, both of which have been famous for over a century at this point for making very, very high-end Mora knives. These are my two examples of Eric Frost, or Frost Erik Ericsson knives. I'm not entirely sure how old either of them are, so I do apologize for that. This particular model, I got in an antique store for, I think, $10. It's an older model. It uses the Erik Frost name, Mora Sweden, and it has this crossguard, which became quite popular amongst the Scout models of Mora's collection. This particular model is quite a bit later. It says Frost. I have Frost Cutlery on it. It mentions made in Mora, made in Sweden, and the fact that it is made from stainless steel, which is very important on a little fishing style knife like this. But you can very, very clearly see the decline in materials over time. Unfortunately, as a company starts to get older and starts to go broke, for lack of a better term, the materials went from this nicely finished birchwood to cheaper, cruder plastics, and that is what eventually led to their downfall. Stay safe and have fun out there, everybody. Peace.